All right, Alexander, let's talk about Ukraine. And supposedly Russia's going to be invading on, we even have a date on February 16th. That's the date of the Russian invasion. Okay. Um, I think there's going to be a two-part video. And I'll explain to all our viewers why. I think I'm going to make this a two-part video because we're not only going to cover Ukraine, and we have to cover what's going on with Ukraine and Russia and the Biden White House and their ongoing efforts to cancel Nord Stream 2 and Germany. Olaf Scholz is going to Russia on Tuesday to meet with Putin. You got Kamala Harris also going to the Munich summit, the security summit, so that she can I don't know what she's going to do there. But, anyway, she's going to be going to Germany. I'm sure that's going to end really, really, really well, and I'm sure we're going to have a lot of interesting content after her visit. But you have that taking place. But you have another thread to all of this outside of the Nord Stream 2 cancellation and this 16th of February invasion date that the White House has set. You have the Duran report, and the main figure, the centerpiece of the Duran report, is Sullivan, and Sullivan has taken lead. He's the point man in stoking up this Russian invasion narrative. He's the reason why I believe we should keep our eyes open for some sort of provocation on the 16th, trying to draw Russia into Ukraine. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but it's a possibility, and Jake Sullivan's definitely pumping that up. But you have the Duran report, and you have Jake Sullivan at the center of the Duran report, and behind Jake Sullivan, we know, is Hillary Clinton, and it won't be the first or last time. Hopefully it'll be the last time. Won't be the first time the Clintons have used a war in order to distract away from their own activities. Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky in the Oval Office comes to mind, and what they did to Serbia in order to distract away from that scandal. Anyway, all I want to say is it's going to be a two-part video, most likely. You can get into the first part, which is covering Ukraine and covering the developments there. Once again, 16th of February is the date that Sullivan and his cohorts have set out for the Russian invasion. And before you get started, Alexander, let's just remind our viewers that if you are watching this from Rumble, you will find a locals button right on top. Click on that locals button and get taken straight to our locals community page, where you will get all kinds of content related to these two very big but connected stories. We'll be doing a lot of exclusive content on these two stories. So, Alexander, let's begin with Ukraine, Russia, the Biden White House, Nord Stream 2, Olaf Scholz, and all of these things going on. And I think it'll naturally lead us to Durham and Sullivan.
Yeah, I think the first point to make is to take up a point that you just made, which is, of course, it is the Americans who are telling us that there's going to be a Russian invasion on the 16th of February. It's the Americans who are still telling us that there's going to be a Russian invasion. The Russians haven't said anything about that. They've not mentioned that they're intending to invade Ukraine on the 16th of February or indeed on any other day. They are still saying that they have no plan to invade Ukraine. And if you think and take a step back and look at the situation, I'm starting to wonder whether the Russians actually need to invade Ukraine. It looks to me as if the way things are turning out, it's just going to fall into their hands, because we've now seen the embassies all relocated from Kiev to Lvov. We've seen all the United States pulling out all American citizens that it can persuade to pull out, and European governments doing pretty much the same thing. So, these are the business people, these are the people who do all the official work there, the people who run companies there, all those sort of people are pulling out. The oligarchs, Ukraine's oligarchs, are also pulling out. And the military people that the United States and Britain and Canada had sent to Ukraine, well, they're all pulling out as well. So given that this is so, you would not be surprised. It would not be surprising if Ukrainians at this moment in time feel completely abandoned. And you saw how there was this telephone call between Biden and Zelensky yesterday, that's to say on Sunday. And Zelensky apparently begged Biden to come to Ukraine, to show himself there, to make it look like, the United States' talk about supporting Ukraine was for real. That's what a JFK would have done. But of course, Biden didn't commit to that. The White House readout of the conversation doesn't even mention Zelensky's request. We still have all the usual tropes and cliches about US support for Ukraine, the firm support for Ukraine. What US support for Ukraine? Many Ukrainians must be asking. And we can already see the wobbles. We see the Ukrainian ambassador in London coming along and saying, well, maybe we've been so completely abandoned. Why bother talking about NATO membership? We're obviously never going to have it. All it's doing is it's now creating a situation where we're being abandoned to our fate, to the Russians who are about to, get whatever they want with us. And there's also Western journalists still in Ukraine. And I was reading a long article in the Daily Telegraph, people moving around the country, speaking to people, not so much in Kiev itself, but in the small towns and villages and those sort of places, up and down Ukraine. And the impression one gets again is that they're absolutely exhausted. They're completely war weary. They again feel abandoned. They don't really feel any longer that the West is going to fulfill any of the promises it has made to Ukraine. So that's the reality. And given that that is so, why do the Russians need to invade? They can just keep their troops moving around the border. They can make threatening noises, or not even making threatening noises. That's the bizarre thing about all of this. And it seems to me they're getting in Ukraine itself, ultimately, everything they want. Sooner or later, if this goes on for much longer, it's going to fall into their lap. And I think I mentioned also that all the oligarchs, all these dreadful people, Pinchuk and Akhmetov and all the rest, they're all apparently flying out of the country in their private jets. They don't want to be there to be rounded up in a Russian dragnet if things really do turn out bad. So, as I said, I still see little real logic in a Russian invasion, but of course, the possibility of some sort of provocation exercise, which might trigger something, is very real. And the Russians are now talking about it. We've had comments about this from Zakharova, from Lavrov, and importantly, in that in those telephone conversations he had with Macron and Biden over the weekend, we heard that from Putin himself. He says, the stage is now being set for some kind of provocation. We're not interested in an invasion. But, given how things are playing out now, maybe that's what's being prepared. Maybe that's what's coming. I still find it bizarre that there would be anybody in Ukraine who would lend themselves to that kind of thing, who would engage in a provocation which would destroy Ukraine and bring it, under Russian control, when all that would achieve is Western sanctions against Russia, which are looking increasingly ineffective. We've seen the Ukrainians confirm that Russia is not going to be disconnected from SWIFT, for example, if there is a Russian invasion of Ukraine. So given that, so it would take, as I said, a particular type of personality to engage in some kind of provocation just to achieve that. But Ukraine is full, unfortunately, of very strange people. And, you don't need a great many of them to stage something like this. And perhaps something like that is coming.
Yeah, can we change the narrative perhaps and stop talking about a Russian invasion and call it what it is, which is what is going to be the Russian retaliation to a false flag or a provocation? I think that's a better way to sum up what's been taking place for the last month, because this narrative of a Russian invasion, in my opinion, has been driven by the likes of Jake Sullivan. And I think, given the information that we now know about Sullivan and Clinton and the spying on an American president, we should not believe anything that comes out of Sullivan's mouth. That's for damn sure. So I think that what we should be talking about at this moment in time is what is going to be the Russian retaliation should a provocation take place on Wednesday the 16th, or or what degree of damage, if a provocation is engineered, what degree of damage will it do to Russian people, to Russian citizens, territory? I don't know. What will be that retaliation? To me, that is the question mark.
Yes.
If there is going to be a provocation, we don't know. Maybe Russian surveillance, Russian secret services, Russian military. Maybe they managed to prevent multiple retaliations. I don't know.
Yes.
Maybe they're doing it as we're speaking.
Well, indeed.
But maybe something gets through, and we have to see what's the extent of that damage, and will it force Putin's hand in order to take action? We just don't know at this moment in time. Given that Olaf Scholz is going to be in Moscow tomorrow, a provocation is very possible to take place tomorrow on Tuesday the 15th or on Wednesday the 16th. That's possible given the timing of the Germans' visit to Moscow and given the fact that the main driver of all of this is forcing Germany to cancel Nord Stream 2. So things are lining up for a provocation, but it's not an invasion; it's a retaliation.
Right,
if a provocation takes place.
Indeed, and that's an important point to make. Now, let's start with that, because, of course, we started last week with this meeting between Putin and Macron. It appeared to go well. They spoke for a very long time. They had a very friendly press conference. It looked as if the situation with respect to Ukraine was abating. The tension seemed to be sort of running down. And, of course, we had Jen Psaki coming along and telling us, well, the invasion isn't imminent after all. And everything seemed to be much calmer until Thursday, when Boris Johnson, who is clearly, his master's voice, which is to say Jake Sullivan's voice in this case, went off to NATO headquarters and said, the situation is now becoming absolutely critical. War is about to happen. This is just after his defense secretary and his foreign secretary are in Moscow, apparently trying to carry out some kind of ineffectual diplomacy. We'll discuss that in another program. And so Johnson starts it, and then you have Sullivan comes along on Friday, and he gives this absolutely astonishing briefing in which he says that, the United States thinks that there's going to be a real chance of a war within the next couple of days. And we have Biden calling together all NATO leaders, telling them the same thing. And apparently Biden told them that the war, that the United States has reason to believe that, that decision by the Russians to launch this war this week has already been made, though it's quite clear that's not based on any intelligence. And, of course, we also have all these anonymous people running around, leaking to the media that they think that the war is going to begin on the 16th of February, and that they've even intercepted the orders that Putin supposedly has given. So, as I said, at the start of the week, things are calming down. At the end of the week, the Anglo-Americans are whipping them up again. The Russians have talked about peak hysteria and absurdity. So it's quite possible we are leading up to a provocation. As I said, the Russians think so. I mean, that's what they're concerned about. You only have to look at their statements and their readouts. Now, things to say. Firstly, it would need to be a very extreme provocation, I think, for the Russians to respond with an outright invasion. Now, there's been a lot of shelling in the Donbass over the last couple of hours, maybe that was part of the provocation, but it hasn't yet resulted in Russian military action. But let's assume that there is a very big provocation. Let's assume that there is a Ukrainian attack on the Donbass, which has been talked about a long, long time. Then the Russians will respond. I mean, they've made that absolutely clear. That is for them a red line. At that point, they will respond. Well, we don't know how they're going to respond, but I would have.
It may not warrant an invasion. I mean,
it may not warrant an invasion, exactly. But let's assume that it doesn't. Let's assume that there's massive shelling of the Ukrainian forces, and that drives them back from the contact line. Well, nonetheless, the Americans will try and spin that as some kind of an attempt to start an invasion or something of that kind. But if things really get wild, and that's not my word, that's Biden's word, then my guess is, and I'm not a military person, that the Russian objective would not be to take Kiev, it would be to encircle the Ukrainian army, which they could do, and bring about its collapse and its surrender, which would happen because, as I say, why would the Ukrainians go on fighting when NATO has abandoned them? But, are we even in this kind of scenario? I mean, that depends, as I said, firstly, on the nature of the provocation. And I have to say, I think the other point that you made about Scholz's visit is absolutely right, because obviously all this Anglo-American hysteria, as the Russians call it, peak hysteria, that was conjured up at the end of last week, I can't help but think that one of its multiple purposes was to get Scholz to cancel his visit to Moscow. I mean, we've talked about the way in which they're trying to get the Germans to cancel Nord Stream 2. They don't want the Russians and the Germans talking to each other, and they don't want Scholz going to Moscow and coming to some sort of deconfliction deal with Putin. So I think the talk that this is all going to happen on Tuesday and Wednesday looks to me very much like an attempt to persuade Scholz to call off his trip to Moscow. And it's very interesting and very important that apparently he's refused to do it and that he's going ahead with this trip. He's going to Kiev first. He's flying, so he clearly doesn't think that Kiev is about to fall. And then he's flying from Kiev to Moscow. He clearly doesn't expect there to be fighting on any big scale over the course of the next few hours or days. And he's going to Moscow, and that meeting between Scholz and Putin is going to be an extremely important one. So it serves multiple purposes, it seems to me. There's a domestic angle in the United States, which we're going to come to. And by the way, the Russians have also been talking about that as well. They've picked that up too. So there's a domestic angle. And there's also this larger grand strategy angle of trying to get the Germans to drop Nord Stream 2 and to stop any signs of a European-Russian rapprochement. So it serves both of those purposes. At the moment, it isn't working. Scholz is still going to Moscow. Macron is still speaking to Putin. They spoke for an hour and 40 minutes on Saturday. But if there is a big enough provocation in the Donbass, or if there's some event involving Crimea over the next few days or hours, then I'm afraid a Russian retaliation becomes distinctly likely.
Yeah, I don't think that the Ukraine army, they don't have the power to cause enough damage to the Donbass, which would warrant a Russian invasion. In other words, I think even increased shelling on the Donbass is something that Russia and the people in East Ukraine, they can handle it. They can handle it. It's not going to warrant a full-on invasion of Ukraine. Like you said, if it gets really bad for some reason, the Ukraine army somehow manages to step up that shelling and do significant damage to the East Ukraine, then Russia can step in and just obliterate the army without any need for any type of invasion. So I don't worry about that. My really big worry is something very covert, an MH17 type of thing, a false flag type of event. That's what really worries me, where you're going to get civilians involved, and then you're going to have to force Putin's hand to do something. Once again, it doesn't mean he's going to invade. Russia is very unpredictable with these types of things, and they do operate on a very asymmetric level. So we just don't know. But at this moment in time, I think everything is lining up for something to take place. Once again, I hope it doesn't. Maybe they're trying to have something take place, and the Russians are thwarting off those attempts. We don't know. But, Olaf Scholz is going to be in Moscow tomorrow, and we're going to find out soon on Wednesday. For me, the main thing that really gets me now about this story is the Jake Sullivan thread. And I think a lot of that, and we're going to get into this in the second part of the video, but going back to what you said, a lot of the hysteria that's been whipped up this week, I think now is due to two factors. One is Olaf Scholz going to Moscow. I think that's one factor. And I think you see the neocon wing of the Biden White House pushing the hysteria there because they have this overarching geopolitical objective. But then you have the Duran information that dropped. And I believe that the Clinton machine knew, they got tipped off by their media friends that this was going to drop or that this was going to get out. And they said, okay, now we got to kick the hysteria into freaking overdrive in order to distract from this, or in order to start something. Yes. So that no one talks about what's going on with Sullivan and the spying on Trump. So I think they were tipped off, and they said, you know what, we need to really kick up the hysteria even more. So let the neocons kick it up on their end. They have their goals. Let us kick it up on our end. Jake, get in front of the camera, make some statements, and let's get the hysteria into absolute overdrive, because we need to cover up all the stuff that we were doing with Trump and all the spying that was taking place. So I think there's two threads that are going on here for all of this hysteria. I think it's impossible now to separate Sullivan from Russia's going to invade Ukraine narrative. It's impossible now.
I agree with that. Now, let's just finish with the neocon and the Scholz.
And also a comment real quick, Alexander, on the fact that Zelensky is trying to prevent all of this. We got to give credit to Zelensky. Absolutely, he's trying to prevent all of this stuff from taking place, provocations, etc.
Well, absolutely. Well, can I just say, I mean, he is, because, of course, he realizes that, I have to say, he's coming across as a increasingly pathetic figure, actually. He's desperately trying to stop a war. He's sensing that Ukraine is disintegrating, which it is. I mean, it can't raise money on the international financial markets. There's been lots of promises of financial aid, but nothing of any practical significance has come his way. And of
airlines
course,
are restricted?
His airlines are restricted. Absolutely, they are. The oligarchs are pulling. I mean, you mentioned MH17. Well, Western airlines are now obviously very nervous about getting themselves into that kind of situation, so they're pulling out of overflights into Ukraine, and of course, the oligarchs, the business people, are all leaving. So I have to say, I feel sorry. I'm starting to feel, for the first time, sorry for him, because he's cutting, as I said, a pathetic figure. You sense that he is utterly bewildered by the pace of events. He's trying to hold things together, even as everything falls apart around him. Because, of course, that's the other side to all of this. Whatever this is doing, whatever the intentions behind it are, and we're going to come to, Durham and Sullivan and all that, the actual consequence, the practical effect in geostrategic terms, is that this is already destroying Ukraine. Its economy is collapsing. The population is becoming, as I said, exhausted and cynical. There was an attempt to whip up an anti-Russian rally in Kiev over the weekend. Only a couple of hundred people turned up, and they were all, people from the usual suspects, and even they didn't turn up in large numbers. So one gets a sense of a sad country that is like a sort of balloon in which all the air is coming out. So there is the geostrategic plan that the neocons undoubtedly, unquestionably have. Stop Nord Stream 2, end this rapprochement between Germany and Russia. But Ukraine is being used as a pawn in all of this, and it's a pawn that's about to be lost because that's the only outcome now that I can see. Even if there is no Russian invasion, even if there is no provocation, even if there is no military conflict, things are not going to go back to where they were. Ukrainians have now seen in the starkest way that if there's a crisis, they're on their own. And inevitably, people are going to start thinking about that, and they're going to be making their own assessments. And you mentioned the Ukrainian army. Why should Ukrainian soldiers, demoralized, badly equipped, as they already were, why would they launch an offensive in the Donbass and put their lives at risk when they must now know that they are completely alone against the Russians? And in fact, attacking the Donbass in that kind of way is only going to result in their defeat and in many cases their death. So let's remember all of that. So the neocon policy with the Germans so far isn't working. It might eventually do. Ukraine, as I said, is being sacrificed. And of course, the possibility of a provocation remains very, very real. I don't want to, raise any particular alarm bells. But one of the things that the Russians have said has happened recently is that S-300 surface-to-air missiles that the Ukrainian military possesses have been redeployed to the contact line, and they could, in theory, target Russian airliners in Russia. So, I mean, you could do, if you want, you talked about an MH17 type event. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but the ability to do it would in fact be there if somebody, as I said, fanatical enough and ruthless enough were prepared to do it. Will they?
Yeah,
Will
and it doesn't
they?
need it.
It doesn't. We don't know.
Yeah, and it doesn't need an invasion for the media,
No.
the very Biden friendly media, to just forget about the whole invasion narrative and whatever that provocation is, for them to focus on that and to pressure Germany to cancel Nord Stream 2 and to distract away from the latest scandal with Sullivan and the Clintons. So I mean, it could be any variant of provocations that that they have planned, which the mainstream media can then jump on and focus on that in order to achieve, one, the neocon goal, and number two, the Hillary Clinton goal. So I mean,
Absolutely.
we're just gonna have to wait and see what they're. Yeah.
I completely agree with that, but can I just also point out, following on from what you said about the media role, one of the most striking things was that after the Biden-Putin call on Saturday, we had this briefing in the White House by the senior administration official. I get so exasperated by this secrecy about whoever this person is. But one of the things this person was bragging about was the fact that the United States has media dominance in the information space. So it's all about that, apparently. And this person was bragging that the Russians have been put on the defensive and making it appear that, whatever happens from now on, the US will be able to shape the narrative. It's all about narrative shaping. And absolutely, of course, you're completely right. If something happens in Ukraine over the next couple of days, if they're able to pull something off, if there is some kind of event which provokes a Russian counter-response, however limited and however measured, well, of course, they control the media space, the information space, and they will spin it how they like it. And that will, of course, make its own facts.
Russia will be blamed. Yeah.
Exactly.
Will be blamed,
make
yeah.
its own,
or like we saw in Syria with Assad, and every time Assad was gaining ground and he was winning, you had some sort of attack, and it was within an hour you had a CNN reporter sniffing the bag and saying, "Oh my God, this smells like the deadly chemicals," and they would just run with that.
Exactly. So
it's the same tricks over and over and over again.
Absolutely. I mean, I was really astonished to see this senior administration official admit to that fact so openly. That, as I said, it's not the facts on the ground. It's the media control that is the Americans' major weapon here. I'm just going to finish by a point that you asked me about earlier in the program about what the effect on Russia would be if these sanctions were imposed. Now, it's become clear that with every iteration, with every discussion, the sanctions have been hollowed out. So, first of all, the Ukrainians have now confirmed that it's been decided, it's been formally accepted that Russia will not be disconnected from SWIFT. Apparently, the Germans said this is a bad idea, but importantly, there are rumors that the Federal Reserve Board in the United States said this is an incredibly bad idea, so let's not go there. So Russia will not be disconnected from SWIFT. Obviously, there's going to be massive pressure on the Germans to drop Nord Stream 2, and I can't imagine that Nord Stream 2 would survive a sanctions war. But Russian gas would still flow to Germany through the Yamal pipeline, conceivably even through the Ukrainian pipelines, even as the Russians start to build their pipelines eastwards. The other thing that would happen is that some Russian banks, the big state banks, would be frozen out of the dollar, so they wouldn't be allowed to convert dollars into rubles. But much of Russian trade is now being converted to euros anyway, and apparently it's not going to cover euros. So that will have an impact, but not quite the decisive impact that people say. And there's lots of talk about high technology exports to Russia from the United States, from the European Union. There's never been much discussion about what these are or how important they are, or why people think that these high technology exports are so relevant to the Russians. I mean, the point people I think aren't perhaps even aware of is that the United States already prohibits exports of high technology items to Russia because of their supposedly dual use capability, the fact that they're supposed to have military technology applications. But we had about 2 weeks ago a quiet admission in the United States that exports of consumer goods, iPhones, iPads, all those sort of things will continue as normal. So these are going to be far more limited sanctions than people realize. There will be an initial major shock in the financial markets. We will see the ruble fall. We will see oil prices quite possibly rise. After a couple of weeks or months, things will settle down and things will carry on much as always.
All right. So if something happens this week, as the U.S. media, as the State Department, as Psaki, as Sullivan are saying, as Biden, as Sleepy Joe Potato Head Biden are declaring something's going to happen on Wednesday. They've got the date. They've got everything down. If something happens, it does appear like this will be to me, this is kind of the last hurrah for Ukraine, for this whole Ukraine thing, which started with the Obama coup and stretched all the way into Trump's presidency and Russiagate and Ukrainegate. And the way I'm watching this is I'm seeing, the Biden White House, pulling out of Ukraine, kind of like Biden's second Saigon moment after Afghanistan. Now you have Ukraine, and he's kind of moving all his pieces out of Ukraine. Embassies leaving Kiev, UK embassies leaving Kiev. All these, this big pullout to leave any presence in central and east Ukraine, say any type of Russian-speaking Ukraine. Now everything's moving to Lviv, whichever way you prefer to pronounce it, and they're moving west, and they're decreasing staff and all these things. So it seems like they've gotten that down. They're disengaging from Ukraine, while at the same time, the neocons are saying, okay, this is it. We're going to completely destroy Ukraine, but we're going to also cancel Nord Stream 2. Let's move ahead with this project. This is it. This is the big one here. Cancel Nord Stream 2, permanently sever Russia from Germany and from Europe, and that's the end game. So it looks like they're trying to move forward with that. And let's segue to the second part of our video as well, which is the Clinton machine.